They said his mind was impossible. So they tested him. When the tests failed, they hid the results. And when hiding wasn't enough, they erased the boy himself. This is not a legend. This is not a myth. This is the story science never wanted you to hear. Narrator: calm, serious, controlled. In the 1800s, the world believed it had already decided who was allowed to be intelligent and who was not. And then one child appeared who shattered every rule. The 19th century was not a kind time. It was a world divided by color, class, and power. A world where intelligence was measured not by ability, but by birth. Scientific journals openly claimed that some minds were naturally limited. Universities taught theories that ranked human beings like animals. And those ideas were accepted as truth. Especially when it came to children born into poverty. Especially when it came to children born with dark skin. Education was a privilege. Curiosity was dangerous. And brilliance, in the wrong body, was considered a threat. This was the world into which the boy was born, the child with no records. No official birth certificate exists. No hospital log. No church registry. Historians would later find this disturbing. Because children from poor families were often undocumented, but not completely erased. Yet with this boy, there was almost nothing. Only scattered mentions. Handwritten notes. Private letters never meant to be seen. And one repeated description. The child observes in silence, but understands everything. He lived on the edge of a rural settlement. A place barely recognized by the state. A place where survival mattered more than schooling. No books. No teachers. No formal education. And yet, his mind was already racing far ahead of the world around him. The first warning sign. It began with something small. Something easy to dismiss. A farmer arguing with a trader over numbers. Weights. Payments. Voices rising. Tempers flaring. And then, a quiet voice interrupted them. A child's voice. The boy corrected the calculation. Not roughly. Not arrogantly. But precisely. The adults laughed. Then they checked. And the boy was right. Not approximately. Not accidentally. Exactly right. That moment should have ended there. But it didn't. Because the boy didn't stop. A mind that moved too fast. Over the following weeks, strange things were noticed. The boy predicted outcomes before events happened. He understood mechanical tools simply by watching them once. He remembered conversations word for word, days later. He asked questions that didn't sound like a child's curiosity, but like a researcher's inquiry. Why does sound echo? Why do shadows bend? Why do numbers behave differently at scale? No one had taught him these things. And that's when fear entered the room. Because curiosity in a child could be charming. But understanding without teaching? That was unnatural. The teacher who made the mistake. A traveling schoolteacher heard the rumors. At first, he dismissed them. Rural exaggerations. Bored adults inventing stories. Still, curiosity pulled him toward the settlement. When he met the boy, he noticed something immediately. The child didn't fidget. Didn't avoid eye contact. Didn't act impressed. He watched. Listening not just to words, but to meaning. The teacher decided to test him. Not seriously. Not academically. Just simple reading. The boy read the passage once. Closed the book. And repeated it. Perfectly. punctuation, pauses, emphasis. The teacher felt a chill. So he tried mathematics. Then logic. Then abstract problems meant for older students. The boy answered them all. Slowly. Calmly. As if the answers had always been there. This should not be possible. The teacher documented everything. Every response. Every test. Every observation. He sent letters. Careful letters. Measured language. But the meaning was clear. This child does not conform to our understanding of development. That sentence would change everything. Because it traveled further than intended. And reached people who did not see brilliance as a gift, but as a problem. When curiosity turns into control. Within months, strangers arrived. Men with notebooks. Men with questions. Men who did not introduce themselves. They observed the boy from a distance. Then up close. Then constantly. They asked him to solve puzzles. To memorize sequences. To explain concepts he had never been taught. And every time, he succeeded. Not with excitement. Not with pride. But with a calm that unsettled everyone watching. One observer wrote. The child does not think like us. He arrives at conclusions we did not anticipate. That was not a compliment. It was a warning. The moment science lost control. The tests grew more intense. Patterns. Time-based reasoning. Memory endurance. They expected fatigue. They expected limits. They found none. Instead, the boy began correcting the tests themselves. Pointing out flawed assumptions. Suggesting alternative methods. That was the moment the room went silent. Cause science was no longer studying the child. The child was outpacing science. And that was unacceptable. A decision made in private. Records show a closed-door meeting. No transcripts survive. Only one sentence, written later in the margin of a report. Further exposure may be problematic. Problematic. Not because the child was dangerous. But because what he represented was. If one boy could exist like this. What did that say about everything they believed? Everything they taught. Everything they used to justify power. The beginning of the end, cliffhanger. Soon after that meeting. The tests stopped. The visitors left. And the boy was taken away. For his own good. That is what the record says. But the records also show something else. From that day onward. His name appears. Nowhere again. Inside the place that was never meant to exist. When the boy was taken away. The world was told. It was for his protection. That was a lie. Because protection does not erase names. Protection does not hide locations. Protection does not lock doors from the outside. What happened next? Was not education. It was containment. The journey no one recorded. There is no official record of the journey. No travel logs. No witness statements. No destination listed. Only one detail appears again and again. In private correspondence. The child was moved at night. Not during the day. Not openly. At night. As if light itself might expose what was being done. The boy did not resist. He did not cry. He did not ask questions. Observers noted something unsettling. He behaved. As though he already understood. Where this was going. The facility without a name. The place they brought him to. Was never called a school. Never called a laboratory. Officially. It did not exist. It was hidden beyond public roads, surrounded by land owned by private interests, funded quietly, and protected fiercely. Inside, the rules were different. Here, morality answered to curiosity, and curiosity answered only to power. The boy was given a number, not a name. That was the first thing they took from him. The men who called themselves observers, the people who studied him, did not see themselves as villains. They called themselves observers, men of reason, men of progress, men convinced history would thank them. They believed they were standing at the edge of a scientific breakthrough. What they did not realize was that they were already standing on the edge of something far darker. Tests that were never meant for a child. At first, the tests were familiar. Memory recall, pattern recognition, logical sequencing. The boy completed them effortlessly. So they escalated. They introduced abstract variables, time-pressured reasoning, contradictory instructions. Still, he succeeded. Then something changed. The boy began predicting what the test was designed to measure. Before it was administered, he would pause, look at the paper, and say, "This will test endurance, not intelligence." He was right. Every time. When the subject became the standard. Within weeks, the observers stopped asking, "How intelligent is the child?" and started asking, "Why can't we keep up?" The boy's responses revealed flaws in long-accepted theories. Flaws no one had dared to question. One researcher wrote privately, "If his conclusions are correct, entire frameworks must be reconsidered." That was the moment. Excitement turned into fear. Because discovery is thrilling. Until it threatens the foundation of everything you know. The first act of silencing. The boy began asking questions of his own. Not childish questions. Dangerous ones. Why are some answers considered unacceptable? Why are conclusions ignored when they are inconvenient? Why is truth filtered through permission? The observers did not answer. Instead, they reduced interaction. Shorter sessions. Fewer conversations. More isolation. The boy noticed. Silence became part of the experiment. Experiments that crossed a line. The tests grew invasive. Sleep deprivation. Sensory manipulation. Extended observation under stress. They wanted to know. Where did his intelligence come from? Was it biological? Environmental? Accidental? Or something else? The boy endured everything quietly. But his performance changed. Not because he was failing, but because he was adapting faster than expected. Faster than they could document. The report that was never published. A comprehensive report was compiled. Detailed. Methodical. Explosive. Its conclusion was simple and terrifying. The subject's cognitive capacity does not align with current scientific limits. That sentence alone could have rewritten textbooks. Instead, the report was classified, restricted, and quietly buried. Because progress is welcome only when it does not disrupt power. A change in how they looked at him. From that point on, the boy was no longer seen as a child. He was seen as a variable. A risk. A potential destabilizing force. Security increased. Access tightened. And a new word began appearing in notes. Containment. Not education. Not observation. Containment. The moment everything shifted, cliffhanger. One night, during a routine evaluation, the boy did something no one expected. He refused to answer. Not out of fear. Not out of anger. But calmly. As if making a decision. He looked at the observers and said, "You are no longer studying me. You are trying to protect yourselves." The room went silent. Because he was right. And for the first time, they realized they were no longer in control. What followed was not documented. But the consequences were permanent. When curiosity became cruelty. Every experiment has a line. A moment where curiosity must stop. And humanity must step in. Inside that hidden facility. That line was crossed quietly. And once it was crossed, there was no going back. A shift in purpose. At first, the observers believed they were uncovering truth. Now, their language changed. Notes no longer asked what the child could do. They asked how much he could endure. Time limits were removed. Rest periods shortened. Silence stretched longer. The boy noticed. Not with fear, but with understanding. The isolation phase. The boy was moved to a smaller room. No windows. No natural sound. No reference to time. Days blurred into nights. The observers called this environmental control. In reality, it was isolation. They wanted to see whether brilliance survived without stimulation. It did. But something else appeared as well. A mind turning inward. Without conversation. The boy began creating patterns of his own. He mapped time by footsteps. Measured distance by echoes. Tracked routines through sound. He was no longer reacting to tests. He was predicting behavior. One observer wrote, "The subject appears to be analyzing us as much as we are analyzing him." That note was never shared publicly. The experiment that changed everything. A new test was approved. One that did not measure intelligence, but limits. Sleep was interrupted. Light manipulated. Questions repeated endlessly. They wanted to provoke error. Instead, the boy began answering. Before questions were completed. Not guessing. Anticipating. It was as if he had learned the logic of their intentions. That frightened them more than any result before. Fear enters the records. Private correspondence reveals a shift in tone. Words like remarkable disappeared. Replaced by unstable, unpredictable, risk. One senior observer wrote, "If released, the subject could challenge established intellectual hierarchies." That sentence sealed his fate. Because the facility was never built to challenge hierarchies. It was built to protect them. The moment of resistance. For the first time, the boy refused to participate. He sat quietly. Eyes open. Unmoving. They waited. Hours passed. No reaction. No compliance. Finally, an observer asked why. The boy answered calmly. "You are no longer searching for knowledge. You are searching for control." That statement was removed from the official log. But not from memory. A dangerous realization. The observers began to understand something they had avoided admitting. The boy was not just intelligent. He was self-aware at a level they could not measure. He understood motives, power dynamics, fear, And he understood that he was never meant to leave. From that moment on, the facility stopped asking, "What should we do?" and started asking, "What must be done?" Preparations in secret. Security increased again. Doors locked from the outside only. Schedules changed without explanation. The boy was observed constantly, but spoken to rarely. A decision was being shaped. Not written. Not signed. But understood. Some discoveries are considered too dangerous to exist. The last documented test. The final test was brief. No complexity. No puzzles. Just one question. If given the chance, what would you do? The boy did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "I would tell the truth. And that is what you fear." That answer was marked non-compliant. The night everything ended, cliffhanger. That night, the facility logs stopped abruptly. No closing remarks. No transfer notes. No conclusion. Only a single line, written later by an unknown hand. The subject is no longer present. No explanation followed. No destination listed. No witness accounts. The boy was gone. What happened next was never officially acknowledged. But the absence he left behind spoke louder than any report ever could. The truth they buried. When the boy disappeared, there were no alarms. No investigations. No public concern. Because the world was never supposed to know he existed at all. And that was the final act. The morning after, the facility resumed operations. As if nothing had happened. Rooms were cleaned. Equipment reset. Schedules rewritten. One room, however, remained empty. The one the boy had occupied. No replacement was assigned. Because there could be no replacement. Not for what he was. Questions that had no audience. A few junior observers asked quietly. Where was the boy taken? Why was there no transfer record? Why had all documentation stopped? They received no answers. Soon after, they stopped asking. In environments built on secrecy, curiosity can be dangerous. The erasure begins. Within months, references to the boy vanished. Reports were reclassified. Files were separated. Names were removed. Some documents were destroyed. Others were rewritten. To suggest failure. To suggest exaggeration. To suggest that the child was never exceptional at all. History, after all, is not always written by those who discover, but by those who decide. What survives? What likely happened? No official record explains the boy's final fate. But historians studying similar cases have identified patterns. Subjects deemed too disruptive were often relocated permanently, isolated indefinitely, or removed entirely from public life. Not executed. Not acknowledged. Simply disappeared. A solution that leaves no evidence behind. The silence that followed after the boy's disappearance. Research in that area slowed. Some projects were abandoned. Others redirected. It was as if the scientific community had collectively agreed. There were questions better left unanswered. Progress continued. But cautiously. Within safer boundaries. Why you were never taught this? You will not find the boy's name in standard history books. You will not see his face in textbooks, because his existence challenged more than science. It challenged who is allowed to be brilliant, who is allowed to redefine limits, and who gets remembered. The easiest solution was forgetting the real legacy. But truth has a way of leaving traces in letters never meant to be published, in margins of forgotten journals, in quiet acknowledgments between scholars. The boy became a whisper, a warning,
a reminder that intelligence cannot be controlled forever. A question left for us. The boy did not change the world, because the world did not let him. But he proved something powerful. That brilliance does not ask permission. That intelligence does not follow rules. And that fear often disguises itself as authority. Why this story matters now. This is not just a story about the 1800s. It is a story about what happens when truth threatens comfort, when systems choose control over understanding, when silence feels safer than change. Some minds are erased, not because they are dangerous, but because they are free. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is not what happened to the boy, but how easily the world learned to live without knowing him. End of story.